On February 28, 2026, the night sky over the Middle East erupted in a synchronized, massive aerial bombardment. Operation Epic Siri deployed an overwhelming wave of B-2 stealth bombers and F-35 fighter jets, utilizing precision-guided munitions to execute decapitation strikes against senior Iranian government and military officials. Western messaging immediately highlighted the destruction of thousands of targets, but the anticipated rapid collapse of the Iranian state failed to materialize. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps decentralized its command structure across 31 provincial units and absorbed the blow. The initial shock-and-awe campaign created a temporary illusion of total operational dominance. Beneath that surface, the conflict had instantly devolved into a grueling, protracted war of attrition. The alliance executing this war quickly fractured over the end goal. Under Donald Trump, the United States strategy focused on containment, applying pressure to force negotiations and reopen trade routes. Meanwhile, Israeli leadership pursued a pursuit of total regime change. That objective demands manpower, and the Israeli Defense Forces are facing severe structural fatigue. Fighting a multi-front war has stretched their conscription and reserve systems to the absolute limit, leaving the military with a deficit of roughly 15,000 soldiers. The American military is facing its own breaking point, driven by an unsustainable financial burn rate. In the opening weeks, the Pentagon spent approximately $1 billion per day to sustain operations. This chart contrasts the expenditure of American munitions against the time required to build them. Over 1,000 Tomahawk and Stealth JASSM cruise missiles were fired early in the conflict. It will take 47 to 48 months to manufacture replacements for those specific weapons. To defend against retaliatory strikes, Allied forces are firing multi-million-dollar interceptors to destroy drones that cost mere thousands. This brutal economic exchange is forcing the United States to strip critical air defense assets, like THAAD batteries, directly from the Indo-Pacific theater. The Western alliance is rapidly burning through irreplaceable materials. In a prolonged conflict, overwhelming conventional military power eventually becomes a logistical liability. Rather than contesting Western air superiority, Tehran shifted the battlefield to a global economic choke point. They effectively restricted 20% of global seaborne crude oil by blockading the Strait of Hormuz. This evolved quickly from a simple military blockade into a highly monetized sovereign operation. Dubbed the Tehran Toll Booth by the shipping industry, the regime began extorting transit fees, demanding up to $2 million per supertanker for safe passage. The most devastating part of this toll is the strict currency requirement. Iran explicitly refuses to accept United States dollars. Vessels are forced to pay exclusively in Chinese yuan, stablecoins, or the Iranian rial. This diagram illustrates how that currency exclusion bypasses the traditional financial system. By halting dollar-denominated oil flows through the strait, Iran severed the primary mechanism of the 1974 petrodollar system. Global energy trade is actively rerouting into alternative settlement networks, like the BRICS digital currency platform. Global financial institutions reacted immediately to this shift. Seeking to insulate their economies from dollar weaponization, non-Western central banks accelerated a record-breaking accumulation of physical gold. By surviving the initial assault and taking control of a single waterway, Iran leveraged localized area denial into a direct assault on American financial dominance. While the primary combatants drain their resources, other nations are absorbing the fallout as pure profit. The massive surge in global oil prices generated huge windfall revenues for Russia, effectively counteracting years of Western economic sanctions. Moscow is also reaping a direct military advantage. The acute need for air defense systems forced the United States to divert Patriot missile batteries and critical intelligence assets away from the Ukrainian front lines. China adopted a highly pragmatic strategy. Beijing secures billions of dollars in heavily discounted Iranian oil, settled entirely in yuan. Simultaneously, Chinese strategists are using the conflict as a live laboratory, observing Western weapon systems and tactics without committing a single soldier. The United States and Israel are bleeding capital and munitions. Meanwhile, the multipolar East is quietly harvesting the economic and geopolitical surpluses. Domestic oil reserves and high production cannot isolate Western consumers from a globally priced commodity. Because global oil demand is highly inflexible, the loss of Middle Eastern supply triggered a massive bidding war, causing United States gasoline prices to spike 30% in a matter of weeks. Europe faced an even steeper cliff. Heavily dependent on liquefied natural gas to replace Russian energy, the sudden paralysis of Qatari shipments transitioned the continent from a state of managing expensive gas to facing imminent physical fuel shortages. Faced with physical scarcity, governments and grid operators accelerated the deployment of digital demand-side management. New legal frameworks, such as Germany's Paragraph 14a, grant grid operators the explicit authority to intervene in local power usage. To prevent the grid from collapsing, operators are actively throttling controllable consumer loads, including home heat pumps and electric vehicle chargers. This strict limit on physical power extends deep into the technology sector. By early 2026, roughly half of all planned artificial intelligence data center builds in the United States were delayed or canceled, simply because the electrical grid could not support their massive energy demands. The era of abundant, on-demand power has fractured. It is being replaced by an infrastructure heavily reliant on state-mandated digital rationing. While the energy crisis captured global headlines, the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz quietly trapped another vital resource: chemical feedstocks required for global agriculture. The Persian Gulf accounts for roughly half of the world's urea exports. This disruption hit exactly at the onset of the Northern Hemisphere's spring planting season, severing the supply of nitrogen fertilizers to import-dependent nations. This graph shows the severe lag effect in the agricultural supply chain. Because fertilizer application has a direct mathematical relationship with crop yields, the inability of farmers to secure these inputs in the spring ensures a massive contraction in the autumn harvest, driving global food prices aggressively upward. This fertilizer shock hits import-dependent regions the hardest. Sub-Saharan Africa relies on imports for over 90% of its fertilizer, and major producers in India and Thailand are seeing their input costs double. The World Food Programme expects these conditions to push an additional 45 million people into acute hunger, bringing the total projection to 318 million people across 68 countries. The 2026 war concludes with a locked-in global starvation event. In modern asymmetric warfare, a localized area denial strategy can effectively hold the basic survival of hundreds of millions of people hostage.